Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Gentlemen, members of this Council, I come before you today with some good news and also a message of hope. After 2.5 years of missed opportunities, I think it's fair to say that the political process to find a comprehensive solution to the conflict in Yemen has finally resumed. This week, during our consultations in Sweden, parties to the conflict have reached several agreements, included in the Stockholm Declaration, which came into force on the 13th of December upon the publishing of the documents. This is no small achievement, made possible first and foremost by the commitment of the parties, and the credit goes to them. I was extremely impressed by their dedication. All made concessions, all engaged in depth and at length and intensively and in good faith. Last week's consultations saw the highest level of interaction between the parties ever seen in consultations in Yemen, and that is a quotes from representatives of the different parties that we heard during the week we were there. I'm sure all members of this Council will share my sincere gratitude to the government of Sweden for hosting us. You, Olaf, and your colleagues understood better than any of us what was needed to make these consultations a success. I know that feeling was shared by all those present, including the leaders of both delegations, and we thank you. Members of this Council and of the international community, Sweden is also your success. The agreements reached would not have been possible without an extraordinary level of support from world leaders, and I certainly feel very privileged to have been able to rely on them. I'm thankful to the Saudi Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, who showed his personal support for this process at vital times and for the agreements we were negotiating in Sweden. I'm grateful to President Hadi, who followed very closely our negotiations, returned to Riyadh during this process, and whose involvement was key on all files. It was President Hadi himself who confirmed yesterday morning to the Secretary General personally his approval on behalf of his delegation of the various proposals before us. I'm also grateful to the leadership of Ansarullah Sayyid Abdul Malik al-Houthi, who demonstrated his commitment to progress at the talks throughout the consultations, and I understand he was in constant communication with his own delegation. The heads of both delegations, Foreign Minister Khalid al-Yamani and Speaker Mohammed Abdul Salam, had a very difficult task, as is normally the case. But they led their delegations with professionalism, with discipline, and with perseverance. It was not an easy exercise, but I thank them both for an outstanding performance. And thank you also to the Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt, who, as you know, made a flying visit only yesterday to the talks at a crucial moment. This would not have happened with a considerable support on logistical arrangements to make the talks happen, in particular the Sultanate of Oman, the Kingdom of Kuwait, and the Saudi-led coalition. And last but absolutely not least, perhaps you will allow me, Monsieur le Président, to record here my thanks, my personal thanks, for the leadership of our own Secretary General. As I have said to this Council before, Mr. Guterres is very familiar with the issues on Yemen and keeps us all very focused. We were in frequent contact these past 2 weeks in particular. His meeting in Buenos Aires, in Argentina, at the G20 summit with the Saudi Crown Prince ensured the last-minute clearances essential to move the 50 injured from Sana'a to Muscat just 2 days before the consultations. And his subsequent visit, taking time out from his, as ever, arduous schedule in Europe, his subsequent visit to the consultations themselves in Sweden from Wednesday night to Thursday night for those vital last 24 hours were obviously instrumental in making the agreements happen. Naturally, I'm most grateful for his leadership. Monsieur le Président, what did we achieve exactly? Firstly, lest we forget, both parties turned up on time. The government of Yemen had done before, but they were now joined by the delegation from Sana'a, and this was no small achievement, given what had gone before. Many people and governments can claim credit for that, and I have already thanked them, but I'm grateful also to the two delegations for arriving ready to work. And Sweden consisted of 8 days of hard work. Meetings were punctual. The parties laboured daily on texts as well as on principles. What began as meetings of a formal nature became, over time, true engagements between people from both sides who know each other and who seek agreement over difference. I wouldn't want to overstate the level of confidence reached between the two sides at this first encounter, but they did business together and almost always in good spirits. But then, more than mere attendance, of course, there were a range of agreements made, details of which have all been published and are available to members of this council. What are they? Firstly, and most dramatically, the parties have agreed finally to end the battles in Hudaydah. This council has for months called for just such an agreement, and I believe we now have it. It entered into force upon publishing those papers on the 13th of December. It includes phased but rapid mutual withdrawals of forces from both the 3 Hudaydah ports and the city. This will be achieved in the context of a governorate-wide ceasefire. The United Nations is asked to monitor the compliance of the parties to these commitments, and I'm sure the Council will want to address this requirement. A robust and competent monitoring regime is not just essential, it is also urgently needed. And both parties have told us they would very much welcome it and indeed depend upon it. And at the instruction of the Secretary-General, speaking himself from Sweden, I understand that the relevant departments in New York and elsewhere are already active on the planning for urgent deployment, subject to the decisions of this Council. And I should add that I spoke only this afternoon to General Patrick Kamert, who is known, I'm sure, to all members of this Council for his exceptional achievements, and who has kindly dropped his other responsibilities to lead the monitoring component of this agreement. And we hope to see him out here in the region as soon as the middle of next week. Being present in the field soon is an essential part of the confidence that needs to go with the implementation of this agreement. Hudaydah has been the focus of international attention this year for a reason. Not merely because it is the centre of gravity of the conflict, but also because it is the vital lifeline, as Mark will no doubt remind us today, for the humanitarian programme upon which millions of Yemenis depend. The ghastly prospect of famine, which Mark has reminded us is in prospect, has made solving Hudaydah and its propensity for battle both urgent and necessary. For this reason, the precise nature and the design of the agreed withdrawals revolve around humanitarian needs, humanitarian requirements, thus allowing a UN as a first step. The lead role in the ports is a vital response to this humanitarian requirement, and we hope to see this happen within days. The UN will take on a leading role in supporting the Yemen Red Sea Ports Corporation in management and inspections at Hudaydah, Salif and Ras Isa ports, which will include enhanced monitoring by the UN Verification and Inspection Mechanism, UNVIM. The UN country team under the leadership of my colleague and friend Lise Grande has developed a plan seeking specific support from member states in the port. Lise and her agency colleagues have indeed been integral to the shaping of agreements on Hudaydah, and two of her colleagues were with us throughout the talks in Sweden, and I'm very grateful to her and to them for their presence. She and they will play a lead role in the civilian aspects of the deal. But I would like to stress, Mr. President, one important aspect of this Hudaydah agreement. It is an outlier. Very deliberately, the arrangements agreed, particularly as regards governance and the temporary arrangements of governance in Hudaydah, intend to set no precedent for the future. They are time-bound. They do not confer any new sense of legitimacy or sovereignty. This is a humanitarian stopgap to save lives, and we hope turn the tide of war towards peace. The parties have also reached a mutual understanding to ease the situation in Thais, with the prospect of opening of humanitarian corridors to allow the safe passage of goods and people across the front lines, the reduction of fighting, the deployment of demining operations. The parties in Sweden agreed to the establishment of joint committee between themselves and with the United Nations in the lead to negotiate agreements to make these objectives happen as soon as possible. So we hope that committee will meet soon, and we hope it will agree a plan to bring some respite to the people of Thais from the situation that they have suffered under these many years. Before arriving in Sweden, the parties had already agreed, it was the first agreement between them in the course of this entire conflict, the parties already had agreed to the establishment of a joint committee to provide and plan for the mutual release of all prisoners. As I had said to this council before, this was the first injunction to me when I took up these responsibilities by President Hadi, who urged the United Nations to focus on the release of prisoners, the important humanitarian nature of which is so clear. Now, this committee, which was established, met frequently in Sweden, with the two sides exchanging lists of up to 15,000 prisoners, and they were very, very lucky to have the full support and involvement and presence in Sweden of the International Committee of the Red Cross. And we hope, with ICRC in the lead, for a mass exchange as soon as mid-January of up to 4,000 prisoners released and able to return to their families. We didn't reach agreement on all the items that were on the table in Sweden. We were not able to reach an agreement on the opening of Sana'a Airport, and we were not able to reach agreement on the measures needed to improve the operations and reach of the Central Bank of Yemen as a condition for the full payment of salaries of all civil servants. However, we will continue to work with the parties intercessionally to seek agreement on those issues. And finally, but not least, the parties have agreed to reconvene at the end of January, and this was a particular point raised by the Secretary-General with President Hadi when they spoke yesterday. Monsieur le Président, in Sweden, the parties finally also discussed my framework, elements of which I presented to this Council in June. The key principle of that framework, based on the three references, the GCC initiative and its implementation mechanism, the outcomes of the National Dialogue Conference and relevant Security Council resolutions, including 2216, is to restore state institutions and the state monopoly of force by providing a clear political future to all parties and to all those who have a say in solving this conflict, and indeed to return Yemen to a state of civil politics and peace. The parties have agreed to discuss this framework at the next round of consultations, ideally, as I have mentioned, before the end of January. And I'm very encouraged by this commitment. I'm very pleased by the generally positive responses of the parties to this framework. I think it's fair to say that Ansarallah are in agreement with the general tenor of all its elements. The government of Yemen has some reservations which I understand and respect, indeed, very much so. And the next step will be serious consideration of the document and its implications. And in this way, we hope to move from the essentially humanitarian theme of Sweden to a first serious consideration of the issues that need to be addressed between these parties if finally the conflict in Yemen, which is to be resolved. Mr. President, I also come before you today with a call for caution. Our collective achievements this week were indeed, I hope you will agree, a significant step forward. But what's in front of us is a daunting task, and as ever in the context of such negotiations, one realizes at the end of negotiations that the hard work is only about to begin. People ask us whether we can trust the parties to implement the agreements that they made together in Sweden. All of us, no doubt, have different views on this. My own is that this is not about whether we can trust one or other on this or that commitment. This is about helping them both to make it happen and to reporting on their success and noting those areas where they fall short of that. Thus, verification is the key to building trust, and I personally hope that this Council will play a part in keeping international attention to the minutiae of the implementation of these agreements. Having said that, I can also confirm the public and private statements made to the Secretary-General by all involved at those consultations that the promises made will not remain only on paper. We believe these statements. We have reason to believe them, and we all hope to see their promises reflected in the next days. Before the consultations, I was asked by both sides whether the other side was serious. This is a frequent reference within the context of the conflict in Yemen. But frankly, I wasn't really sure until about 2 weeks ago. Today, I'm more confident. But more than this, what Sweden demonstrated each day was the existence of an absolute international consensus on the need for progress and on the simple proposition that only a political solution can resolve this conflict. Among us in Sweden were the representatives of those governments accredited to the government of Yemen. Their ambassadors were with us. They were in daily contact with the parties. The permanent members of this council, very prominent among them, and that without their help, we would not be here, we would not be where we got to today. But this sense of international consensus and this sense of international commitment was of great importance, not just for the parties in Sweden, but evidently for the people in Yemen who are finding some small signs of hope for the future. As the Swedish foreign minister indeed said to the press on the closing of those consultations, no longer can Yemen be considered a forgotten war. And now we can begin to hope for a track that may indeed lead to its early resolution. Thank you, sir.